A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus and his disciples set out for the villages of Caesarea Philippi. Along the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" They said in reply, "John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others one of the prophets." And he asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter said to him in reply, "You are the Christ." Then he warned them not to tell anyone about him. He began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer greatly and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and rise after 3 days. He spoke this openly. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. At this, he turned around and, looking at his disciples, rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan! You are thinking not as God does, but as human beings do." He summoned the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "Whoever wishes to come after me must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and that of the gospel will save it." The Gospel of the Lord. A couple of months ago, when I was greeting people after Mass, I overheard a parishioner talking about having made a trip to Cooperstown, New York to see the induction of Barry Larkin into the Baseball Hall of Fame. And afterward I started thinking about and remembering all the stories and legends that I've heard about Hall of Famers through the years. And then after I read over today's Gospel, the one story that came to mind is the story of Ted Williams and the Season for the Ages. Now, to say a word about Ted Williams, we see in his life times of great accomplishment and nobility, and we also see times of human weakness. So even though he was one of the greatest baseball players ever, in a way he was just like us, an ordinary guy. But we can learn from ordinary people, and we can learn from Ted. In 1939, he signed up with his one and only major league team, the Boston Red Sox, and in his rookie year he hit .327. And then the year after that, he raised his average to .344. But then his third season, 1941, that was his year. He led the league in home runs, he led the league in runs, he led the league in walks and in slugging percentage, and he had an on-base percentage that not only led the league, it set a major league record. And he won the All-Star game for the American League with a home run in the 9th inning. But what people remember most was his quest to hit 400 over an entire season. And he began a little bit slowly. He had an ankle injury early in the year. But by Memorial Day, his average was over 400, and it stayed over 400 through July and August and into September. And with just 1 week to go in the season, his average was 406. But then, in the next to last series, he went 2 for 10, and his average dropped down to 401. And there was one series left to go in the season with the Philadelphia Athletics. And in the first game of that series, he hit 1 for 4, and his average dropped down to 399.55. Now, since baseball didn't count that many significant figures, the average would be rounded up to 400. So he was still hitting 400, as he would say, by his fingernails. And all that was left in the season was a doubleheader on the final day. And so before that final day, the manager of the Red Sox, Joe Cronin, took Ted aside and he pointed out that this would be an away game in Philadelphia and there wouldn't be that many fans there. Philadelphia wasn't a very good team. And there wouldn't be that many reporters there. And so if Ted wanted to sit out that final day, he would still officially have his 400 average. Now there was something else that was about to happen that neither man knew about, and that's that 2 months after the end of the baseball season, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And by the end of the next season, Ted would have traded his baseball uniform in for the uniform of his country as he served in the Second World War. And of course, when he left, he had no idea whether he would ever play another Major League game. But on that day, in September of 1941, he had to make up his mind about whether he was going to play in that final doubleheader. And so finally, he gave his response. And he said, "You know, the record's no good unless it's made in all the games." And so the next day, he went out to play that doubleheader, and he put the 400 average on the line. And so, with his teammates looking on, in his first at-bat, he lined a clean single. And then in his next at-bat, he hit a home run. And the at-bat after that, he hit another single. And by the time the day was over, he'd gone 6 for 8, and his final average was 406. And he was the last player ever to hit 400 in a season, maybe the last man that will ever hit 400 in a baseball season. And for the rest of his life, he could tell people that he had made this accomplishment through the last game, the last at-bat, and the last swing. Now in today's gospel, Christ asks his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they respond, some John the Baptist, others Elijah, or one of the prophets. "But who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter answers what has been revealed to him. "You are the Christ. You are the Messiah." And so when Christ tells his followers about how he must be rejected and suffer and be put to death and then rise on the third day, Peter admonishes him as if to say, that's not my idea of what a Messiah does. A Messiah should be seated at his place of majesty. And then we hear the rebuke from Christ. "Get behind me, Satan. You think as men do. You think that because I am the Messiah, I have already ascended to my place of majesty. What my Father knows is that I will not do so until I have gone through all of these things, until I have taken my last breath, until my mission is complete." And then he tells his followers that if they desire to follow him to his place of glory, they must deny themselves and follow him through his life, his suffering, and his death. And while he speaks to the apostles who will need to give their lives as martyrs, he also speaks to those of us who feel that we're destined to die of heart disease or cancer or old age or whatever. And he speaks to that temptation that comes to us to feel that somehow we can be disciples and still hold back, still set aside some time for ourselves to live our lives as we desire. And if we get that temptation, think for a moment about Ted Williams. He was so dedicated to the game he played that he considered that 400 average to be unworthy if he didn't achieve it in every game to the last game. In the same way, our discipleship is so precious to us that we dare not let a single day go by where we don't deny ourselves and follow Christ. And so, in our days of work, we're disciples. And like Ted Williams, sometimes we have a double header. And in our days with our families, we're disciples. And even in our days of leisure, we're disciples. And we see those as opportunities to rest so that we can continue and we can complete our journey with Christ. And we witness our discipleship in our words, in our deeds, and particularly in our prayers. And I think of our morning offering, a prayer that My classmates and I used to pray every day back when I was in grade school, and hopefully most of us still pray. O Jesus, through the Immaculate Heart of Mary, I offer you my prayers, works, joys, and sufferings of this day. And to tell us how important that is, we have no less than a member of the Beatific Hall of Fame, St. John Vianney, who tells us all that we do without offering it to God is wasted. And again, we have to remember to put ourselves on the line for Christ every day, because as Ted Williams himself could tell us, you never know what tomorrow will bring.